Tonight we're in Beckenham. Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Grant Shapps, the government's Transport Secretary, former Minister and Chairman of the Conservative Party under David Cameron. A Labour MP for nearly 10 years, former Shadow Secretary for Energy and Climate Change, Lisa Nandy. Rupert Read, Professor of Philosophy at East Anglia University, former Green Party candidate and now spokesperson for climate change campaigners Extinction Rebellion. Journalist and breakfast host on Talk Radio, Julia Hartley-Brewer. And businessman and guest dragon on the BBC's Dragon's Den, Theo Paphitis. Welcome very much to our panel, to our audience here, and of course to you at home. Joining the conversation, you can argue along in the usual way, hashtag BBCQT, on Facebook, on Instagram and on Twitter. We'd like to hear what you've got to say. So let's hear our first question tonight, which is from Sally Knight.
Should climate change activists be applauded or arrested?
Lisa.
Well, I really support what's happened in the last few weeks, and I don't say that lightly, but the reason I say it is because I've been a Member of Parliament now for nearly 10 years, and over that time I've seen how this is an issue, the most important issue of our time, that is always kicked into the long grass, because there's always something that is supposedly more important, always something that is supposedly more pressing. And I think without those young people going out on climate strike, without the protests that we've seen in the streets, this issue just quite simply would not be on the agenda. But what really matters now is what happens next, because there's a chance now to build a really broad coalition that will keep that pressure up. Why do we need to keep the pressure up? Because we're not even on track to meet our net zero target by 2050. The reason for that is actually Grant's department, transport, where we're actually going backwards in terms of emissions, not forwards. And I suppose the only thing I would say to the protesters, many of whom I really admire so far, is that you've got to take people with you on this journey. There is no point in telling people in towns like Wigan to get out of their cars when our trains and our buses have been brought to a standstill for the last 2 years. This has got to be a positive agenda about creating the clean energy jobs in towns like mine, jobs that were lost when the mines closed many years ago, about warmer homes, about better futures for our young people and about a better environment. And if we make common cause with people who are trying to improve the daily lives of ordinary people in this country, I think this is a battle that we'll win, we'll start to take action and we'll build a better Britain in the process.
Theo, what's your view?
Well, I think the argument is undeniable, although I think there's a bloke across the pond that is denying it's ever happening. But we'll put him to one side for the moment, because it's not very important here tonight. But the reality is the argument is undeniable. The method is ridiculous, because I've just come back from my company conference, 2 days, I had 500 colleagues there, and I've got to tell you, climate change was the #1 question we had for discussion at that conference. We've got so many things for our business. Everybody's tuned in on the environment, sustainability, climate change and what our business is doing. And in fact, they even voted that now we should plant this year a tree for every colleague we hire, and we already have. That's over 4,000 trees for this year, and they're saying they'd rather have that spent out of our bonus pot. That's how important it is. So we don't need people to get super glue, stick it on somebody else's butt and hang around there for 2 days, stopping them going to work, stopping them going to the hospital, stopping them going through their normal everyday lives where they work to put food on the table for their children, a roof over their head and to lead a normal life. That just is not acceptable.
Sally, what's your view? You asked the question.
I think it's really interesting, Lisa, that you use the word protester, because I deliberately worded the question activist. Right. Which is suggesting that I absolutely support the cause. Yeah. And it's absolutely right that this is highlighted and that the governments worldwide take notice. But I agree with Theo that the methods I really don't applaud at all. And I think for normal people just trying to get to work, do the right thing, it really is deplorable. And I just think there are better ways to grab headlines.
So, Rupert, what do you think when you hear that? Because you want to take people with you.
Well, I think the first thing to say is, if there are better methods, honestly, I'm all ears. Because I've been in this game for a long time. I've been working in non-governmental organisations, in the Green Party for many years, knocking on doors, etc. And you know what? None of it worked, right? Earlier on this year, we're still on the same trajectory to disaster as we have been for the past 20 years. But then what happens? In April, we had Extinction Rebellion, and the first glimmer of starting to change. We managed to push the issue up the agenda when 1,000 of us, brave souls, and it's because of them, you know, it's because of those 2,000 people now of ours who have been arrested.
You're deluded.
Excuse me, let me just finish this point, it's key. It's because of those 2,000 people that have been arrested, yeah, that I have the privilege of being here on this panel this evening at all, right? Otherwise, I wouldn't be here, yeah? But look, what I do want to acknowledge is this. There's a reason why the story hasn't worked until recently. And the reason is that the problem feels too remote. So, yeah, after April, a lot more people said, we agree, climate change is an emergency. But it still feels too remote to people. It doesn't feel like an emergency. So, you know, those of you who are there thinking, well, but is it really quite as bad as they're saying? I get where you're coming from. I understand that. I tried for 20 years in the old methods and the old story, and it doesn't work. So here's my message this evening. We're changing up. We're changing up in terms of our methods, non-violent civil disobedience, the same thing that succeeded for the suffragettes, for Martin Luther King, for Gandhi, and many others besides, and we're changing up with the message. So my message to you tonight is, forget about 2050, forget about rising sea levels, forget about polar bears and penguins, precious and beautiful though they are. This is about us now. This is about the fact that last summer, the crops in this country were failing as they were baked in the fields. This is about the vulnerability of our food supply. This is not even about our children or our grandchildren anymore. This is about the intense vulnerability of our whole society to this catastrophe that is already descending on us. That's why we're at London City Airport today, showing some of that vulnerability. That's why we need to be out there until that message gets through and starts to really, really change.
OK, let's hear a little bit from the audience here. The man in denim jacket.
Obviously, we all know that the environment is a huge issue. I myself follow a plant-based diet because of it. But it's interesting that you talk about the methods. For me, a load of people dancing in the street, probably, you know, off their head and, you know, dreadlocks, soap dodgers.
You may be maligning a whole group of people, though, I'd just like to say.
Yeah, but
I mean,
well, I think it's the wrong type of people who are putting out this message. There is a real you know, argument for the environment, and it's completely painting the wrong picture. And as Theo said, it's stopping people going to work, it's causing normal people problems, and it shouldn't be. It should be a problem that we all adopt and we all change our regular lifestyles for. And I think, you know, when you see these people dancing in the street, it's not a protest, it's just a field day. And I think it's really important that we make this a proper issue and not make it look stupid.
Now, Rupert, I know you want to come back in, and I'll let you. I'm just going to get round yours a little bit. Yes, you in the front, you wanted to say something.
I do worry about some of the younger people who are seeing this and thinking it's an appropriate thing for them to do, potentially then getting criminal records and then potentially harming their future employment prospects by having a criminal record, which then means certain job opportunities aren't available to them.
Man in the glasses.
One individual called Greta Thunberg, we know, we understand her. She's actually garnered a lot of support as an individual around the world, and whether you like her attitude or not, she's actually done that. Whereas what we have now is our activists in London who are actually alienating people against them. I think they're starting to destroy the argument, and they need to be very careful.
The woman in the yellow sweater here.
I was going to reference a George Monbiot article a few days ago where he spoke about the need to perhaps refer to this as an extermination event rather than an extinction event, because that's too passive, and I wondered what the panel thought of that. And
do you support the action that's been taken by Extinction Rebellion?
I do, yes.
With a big sign.
I do, yes. I think it's sad that they're being arrested rather than applauded. I think that's a waste of police time.
I'll come back to a minute. Just let me hear a little bit from the rest of the panel. Julia.
Look, absolutely, I think we should be tackling environmental issues, moving towards renewable fuels, cleaning up our waste and our oceans. and looking after our planet. But there is nothing in any of the science, nothing in any of the IPCC reports that suggests we are heading towards a catastrophe, a crisis, mass extermination or anything of the sort. This is scaremongering of the worst kind.
Well, the UN says we have 12 years to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees and urgent and unprecedented changes are needed.
Well, no, what it says is if we do actually want to try and prevent 1.5 degrees, we have there's a two-thirds chance that we can do that if we do address those issues. But there's not necessarily a catastrophe that results if we don't do that. The Earth has been warmer than that. But the key thing is what we have to do in order to achieve that. What Extinction Rebellion are doing and what they want, which is very, very different from what has been discussed by other climate activists over the years, is the net zero global of carbon emissions by 2025 is achievable not by getting rid of diesel cars or perhaps people having a bit of an extra tax on their flights to Mallorca on holiday. We are talking about getting rid of all cars, all buses, all trains, all central heating, all flights, having state rationing of meat. This is what it will actually involve. It's impossible to achieve that target otherwise. This is about taking us back to a pre-industrial age. Now, we're told constantly this is a terrible thing. Industrialisation has been a terrible thing. Industrialisation, the Industrial Revolution, is the greatest thing that's ever happened to mankind. It has delivered longer, healthier, happier, more fulfilling lives for billions more people than anything else that has ever been achieved by our planet. The best time to be alive is right now, apart from tomorrow. Whatever the issues are regarding climate change, they will be solved by technological innovation, by the markets, by governments, yes, getting together, and by a sensible debate based on the facts. What we've got with Extinction Rebellion, I'm afraid, is not a sensible debate based on science or the facts. It is, to all intents and purposes, a sort of quasi-religious death cult. And I, for one, think it's absolutely insane that people are listening to their absurd demands.
Rupert, would you like to respond to that quasi-religious death cult?
Well, look, I apologise to the young man for not having a nose ring, and I apologise for not being part of any cult. In fact, I take a lot of my prompting from the United Nations, from the IPCC, who repeatedly say in their most recent report to limit global overheat to 1.5 degrees, which is considered the threshold for danger, we need rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. And why we're back is to say, where's the action? Where's the action towards that goal? Today, those famous eco-extremists, the International Monetary Fund, said this: the risk of catastrophic and irreversible disaster is rising, implying potentially infinite costs of unmitigated climate change, including human extinction. Now, if that's not a license for the kind of thing that we're saying and doing, I'm not sure what is. Greta Thunberg was mentioned. I have the privilege of knowing Greta Thunberg, and I asked her in public when she was here in April to support our first rebellion, what's your view of Greta? What's your view of Extinction Rebellion, Greta? And her reply was very simple. She said, I support it wholeheartedly. And you know what? At the end of the day, this isn't about whether or not you feel sort of warm towards Extinction Rebellion. We don't really matter, right? What matters is if we succeed in drawing attention to the issue, and if we succeed in managing to start to get at last the action we need to stop ourselves driving ourselves over a cliff. That's what it's about.
But Rupert, don't you understand? You're acting like numpties. You're turning people away from the great cause that we all believe in.
We're talking about it now. I've just explained the cause, and actually I'm getting a decent amount of applause here, so I kind of think we're doing all right.
Still numpties.
Grant, you're sitting here very quietly.
Well, as Lisa rightly pointed out when she was asked the question at first, my department, the Transport Department, actually is responsible for a lot of the CO2. Here's the thing that's not in doubt. We have to get a grip of this. I have no doubt about it at all. 27% of the CO2 comes from transport, and 90% of that is from vehicles. And there's some really easy things that we can do, which has moved, for example, towards electric cars, electrification of the roads. And that would be a very big first move. I've got an electric car, it's fantastic. These are practical steps we can take. But here's the thing I don't understand, Rupert. We are living in the country, the industrialised nation, that's done more to move further and faster to decarbonise than any other country in the world, that's legislated to get to net zero. So rather than stopping people from getting to work and stopping people from meeting their hospital appointments, go to a country which isn't doing any of these things and protest there.
I just totally agree what you just said there. Absolutely spot on. And instead of making it difficult for other people, why don't you protest like peacefully and protest outside the embassies where they're not doing anything at all?
Okay. The woman in the red sweater here. Yes, you.
I was in London today and at Charing Cross, and there was a whole line of people with like lead-type makeup and wearing green and red, walking silently through the station. And I made the presumption they were Extinction Rebellion because they were all in the Trafalgar Square.
They were, yeah.
I do applaud the sentiment behind it. However, it is alienating a lot of people.
Yep.
And for me personally, I do think that there is a climate problem. I do think we all need to do something. However, for me, the person that's made the most impact on me is Sir David Attenborough in The Blue Planet, when he said quite majestically, respectfully, the amount of plastic that's in the ocean and that the whales and the other creatures are swallowing. And for me, that made a huge impact, and it made me think we all need to get together, all of us, to do something small to make an impact.
Did it make you change your behaviour, out of interest?
Yes, it did. It made me take things seriously, because for him to go on record to say that, and the way he goes about saying it, it made me pay attention. And my nephew is 6, and he watches The Blue Planet, and I know that it will make an impact on him, and he is the future for us.
So I find it really incredible that, Grant, you can sit there and say, let's look at the countries, let's take some accountability here in the UK. Lisa, I think what you said about public transport in northern areas is so true. And what I'd like to see is some accountability from the government around private car ownership and taxing something that we know is incredibly dangerous, and investing that money into public transport, specifically in northern regions where, you know, systematically London's overfunded and then northern regions are left where private car ownership is a necessity.
The woman in the yellow sweater.
I was held up by the Extinction Rebellion protesters earlier today, and I was late picking my son up from school as a result. And he was in floods of tears, desperately upset because I wasn't there when he expected me to be. But in 20 years' time, he's not going to remember that. What he will remember is if we fail to act now on this emergency. We can cope with a bit of disruption now. If it has the effect of us actually taking action, a bit of disruption is nothing.
What's next, Rupert? I mean, the plan is that this campaign will go on for the next 2 weeks. Do you anticipate it lasting the full fortnight? And then what happens after that?
Well, whether it lasts the full fortnight, that depends on how many of the audience come and join me after tonight and take the barricades. Look, in terms of the things that have just been said, a couple of key points to respond to. The net zero target that the government has legislated for, great. That wouldn't have happened without us. That was outside of the window of political possibility before the April Rebellion came along, and our rebellion changed the figures completely in terms of how important people thought the issues were. This is fact. This is just straight fact. Look at the polls before and after the rebellion. After the rebellion, people suddenly start saying the environment is a more important issue than immigration, more important than the economy. The first time that's ever happened in this country. That's down to us. Now, in terms of the figures you gave us, Grant, about how well this country is doing. You know, the first demand of Extinction Rebellion is tell the truth. And I just so wish that you would start telling the truth.
Which figures?
I wish
Which
the figures where you claim that we're doing better than all the other countries, right?
We've decarbonised faster than any other G20.
Those figures are only...
The gas emissions and greenhouse gases have come down faster than any other G7
Only
since 2010.
if you exclude from those figures all the figures for air travel and sea travel and for all the products
which
that we buy from China
internationally are in the same category for every country.
India.
That doesn't change it for our country because it's an international
Excuse me, it does change it because actually we fly a lot more in this country than people do in other countries.
In the States?
No, not in the States than in Europe. Oh. So when you get the figures right, when you tell the truth, we're not doing well at all. Our carbon emissions have barely come down since 1990. Those are the facts. And I just so wish, it is true, that is the truth. I've written on this. I so wish you would look into it. And I so wish you would start telling the truth. Now, in terms of the thing about other countries and saying, oh, why don't you go and protest in China, whatever, our rebellion is worldwide, right? What we started here is being exported all over the world. A great British export. It's completely peaceful, completely non-violent, and as the lady so rightly said, it's disruptive. But you want to see real disruption? Crop failures, right? children not knowing whether they're going to have a future at all.
No, but
That's the
this
real
is absolute nonsense. This is Malthus on crack cocaine. This is the stuff that's been predicted. This sort of nihilistic, the world is going to end stuff.
The IPCC
is what has been
and the IMF.
The IPCC is not predicting any of that. There is nothing in the science, nothing in the documents, nothing in any of the IPCC reports that is predicting any of that. What this is, the tactics you're using, and again, you don't have aims in Extinction Rebellion, you have what you call demands. And those demands you're trying to push through by bullying. You've got the option to stand at the ballot box. You have the cheek talk about the suffragettes and the civil rights movement in the United States. Women didn't have the vote, and neither did black people in America. That's why they had to resort to that sort of action. You have the ballot box. Last time round, the European elections under PR, where Green Party isn't actually affected by the first-past-the-post system, got 11.8% of the vote. That's a massive increase on the last general election, 1.6%. So it does show you can persuade, but if you want to persuade people at the ballot box, you want to have the argument,
Julia,
then you can do it.
I do stand at the ballot box, and I say to you, as someone elected 3 times, you are wrong about this.
To bully people through protest and disruption is just, that's what it is, it's just bullying.
No, I'm sorry, it's not bullying to point out to people that this actually is an international crisis that has to be taken much more seriously. It's no good for Grant to sit here and say, look at all the brilliant things that we're doing, when his government is the one that slashed investment in solar, that effectively banned new wind farms, that subsidised diesel, which is the dirtiest fuel of all.
And your party is opposed to fracking, which is one of the cleanest energy forms. Your party is opposed to fracking. Fracking would bring down our carbon emissions. You're opposed to it.
Well, we're in favour of giving people a right to decide, which strikes me as frankly democratic if you're going to have fracking imposed on your area. But look, let me say this to you as well. This isn't just about the environment, as absolutely critical as that is. This is about Mark Carney, the Governor of the Bank of England, saying very, very clearly that climate change and our failure to tackle it is the biggest threat to the global financial system. This is people's pensions, this is people's life savings, this is people's livelihoods. And if you don't care about the future of the planet, which you clearly don't,
but this is it. Whenever you have
if you won't accept the evidence about that, at least accept that there are people in this room and people listening at home who stand to lose an awful lot if you carry on pretending that this is not real.
This is it, you see. And this is... This is the nonsense scaremongering that we have. And instead of having a sensible debate about the science and about the facts and what the economic and political costs are of various different forms of action to tackle the issue, we just sort of shout, well, you just don't care about the children if you don't agree with me. And that's not a sensible political grown-up debate.
You're ignoring the science.
I'm not ignoring the science at all.
Final word, then I get to move on.
Gentleman over here said we should move faster on cars, which, by the way, we had already said we'd end the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2040, before any of the Extinction Rebellion action. Last week I talked about investigating bringing that forward to 2035. Gentleman over here talks about Northern Rail, and we're putting a huge multi-billion package into building a lot more Northern Rail. I don't think this should be a political issue, in as much as across Parliament we've agreed to vote for this. But Lisa, I have to pick you up on your solar claim, because 99% of all the solar capacity in this country has been built since this government was in power. So your fact is simply wrong. And Rupert, sorry, just to finish off, you want us to be fact-based. We are following the facts of the Committee on Climate Change.
You're lying
who are
with
actually...
statistics.
Oh, you see, now you don't...
Absolutely.
So the Committee on Climate Change are now the ones who are wrong about it.
The Committee on Climate Change are telling you that you're actually way, way off the pace, and that your efforts on adaptation look like your dad's army. In other words,
so when we have a country, for example...
That's what they say about it.
So when we have a country that, for example, last year, and you won't let these facts out for some reason, last year, low-carbon production of energy made up over 53% of our entire production as a nation. If I listened to you, I believe we were getting nowhere, whereas, in fact, this economy is decarbonising. As I said before, rather than disrupting people's lives here, go and protest in the countries where the carbon actually needs to be cut at a much faster rate, where they don't have any plan in place.
It starts at home.
I'm going to take another question. If we thought that was a reasonably heated debate, should we have a bit of, I was going to say light relief with Brexit, but I'm sure that's not going to happen. Mike Reish.
Is there a realistic pathway to a Brexit deal by the end of October, or is it just more political spin and bluster?
So, Grant, what's going on? It was very like a love-in in Cheshire today.